Hi, this is Chicana Larks and welcome to my channel. Before Los Angeles had the Dodger Stadium, it had La Loma, Bishop, and Palo Verde. There were three mainly Mexican-American communities that were thriving in what is now known as Chavez Ravine. It was one of the few places due to redlining and racist land covenants that Mexican Americans could buy land and build wealth. But things changed by the late 1940s. The city characterized the area as belated, and it set the stage for a decade-long battle from the residents to try to preserve this community and fight threats of eviction. Chavez Ravine seemed to check off every single box to build a new project, but it had to be built in a thoughtful way to fit around this new freeway that they had in mind, and they wanted to remake downtown to fit more business area, cultural hub that would benefit the ruling class of Los Angeles. While downtown was fully accessible, the Freeway 110 served as a physical separation between downtown and Chavez Ravine. And it was also very reflective of cultural separation and political division. While most residents of Los Angeles viewed Chavez Ravine as at best an antiquated and backward town, and at worst a slum, mostly referred to as an eyesore, vacant, and shantytown, the residents who had moved there to escape discrimination that they had faced in Los Angeles, and also due to redlining because they couldn't find anywhere else to go, they viewed this place as cultural and thriving. They viewed it completely different than everybody else. For those who lived there, it was home. It was a self-sufficient place. It was a tight-knit community and a very rare example of small town life in such a huge metropolis city. They took pride in it, having developed the area into a beautiful, thriving, vibrant community that had its own church, its own elementary school, its own recreational area, and where they grew much of their own food. But all this was set to change when city planners led by Frank Wilkerson of the Los Angeles Housing Authority targeted the area for redevelopment in efforts to turn Chavez Ravine into Elysian Park Heights, which was a public housing project that was about to cover 54 acres of the land.
In 1948, Los Angeles designated Chavez Ravine as the first blighted area to be rebuilt. To residents of Chavez Ravine, all this came as a shock.
They tell the whole city that the Chavez Ravine was nothing but shacks, and that's the biggest lie.
We were not slums, and we were a community on an upward trajectory, and we were just Americans like everyone else.
The city of Los Angeles had a power called eminent domain, which let them acquire anyone's land as long as they paid residents what the city deemed a fair price for it. By July 1950, residents were notified that they'd have to move out and sell their homes. The city had a plan to replace Chavez Ravine with a new community, Elysian Park Heights. It would include 13-story buildings, rows of landscaped townhouses, and stores. It was presented to residents as a great opportunity.
They would always say, well, you could move back into this wonderful village. Why would we want to move into a project where we already had a yard and home ownership?
Why would we want to go live in an apartment complex with 100 other people?
And that's what seems to have escaped everyone, is that we were homeowners and we had affordable housing.
The majority of the residents were forced out so the city could build this project. The initial plans called for a construction of 163 one-story buildings, which would accommodate about 3,600 families. The notification of intended plan was given to residents in July 1950. The letters explained to residents of the intended plan, and it also ensured that once Elysian Park Heights was up, they would have first chance to move back in. The letters also announced the opening of 3 new offices in which the residents were able to go to for guidance in getting relocated. While rumors had been spread for years It was still a crushing and devastating blow for lots of the families, especially given the reality that lots of the families living there were undocumented. So that means that they were not able to meet the requirements for this new public housing project that they were developing. The City Housing Authority uses power of eminent domain to buy out houses from these residents, giving them little to no compensation.
They value the houses like worthless. They never gave us the right price. So everybody that sold their property in Chavez Ravine had to go in debt when they moved out.
I remember that knock on the door when the man came in and handed some papers to my aunt. My aunt burst into tears, started crying uncontrollably.
They put fear in the people because they put the tractors next to your house. What more can people get scared if you put a gun to your head?
It was awful. It wasn't just we're taking your home. There was this big feeling that we were helpless, hopeless, and could do absolutely nothing about it.
After the evictions, they start tearing everything down. No houses. Everything was just like the desert.
Some residents resisted and actually took the city's actions to court. But by the summer of 1952, most of Chavez Ravine was completely abandoned. Then political winds shifted and private home builders and the public interest group named Citizens Against Socialist Housing, which unironically is shortened CASH, played up these early Cold War fears of socialism. Support for the government-run housing project really crashed. The city canceled its redevelopment project with the federal government, abandoning 2 projects, including Elysian Park Heights. The housing authority sold its land in Chavez Ravine to the city with the condition that it would be used for public purposes, and Chavez Ravine sat in a limbo for several years. LA Mayor Norris Polson met privately with Dodgers owner Walter O'Malley, and at the time they were struggling to build a new stadium in New York, and because of these failed attempts they suggested and wanted to move to LA. And at this time, that's when the mayor floated the idea that they should build the stadium in Chavez Ravine. The Dodgers then struck a deal with the city. The team would purchase the minor league of Los Angeles Angels and give the 9-acre land be transferred to the city. In exchange, the team would receive a 315-acre land in Chavez Ravine to build the stadium.
By August 1952, Palo Verde, La Loma, and Bishop had become ghost towns. The city's acquisition of the land designated for the housing site was nearly complete. Condemnation proceedings were underway against a few property owners who still held out. It was in one of these hearings that the Elysian Park Heights housing project was dealt an unexpected blow.
We had a tremendous support for the program. Pretty well finished the engineering and the architectural work. And the only people who were opposing it were what is commonly called the real estate lobby. It was headed up by the Apartment House Owners Association and other people like that. They called it creeping socialism. They were trying to discredit it every way they could. They had petitions, they had initiatives to try to kill the program. We should have been more suspicious than we were. As I remember, it was a very large site with vacant land, but the owner of that property was a prominent business person downtown LA, and he demanded, I think, $100,000. And we were fighting with them over value. He wanted as much as he could get. When out of nowhere, this lawyer for the property owner turned to me and said, "Now, Mr. Wilkinson, I want to ask you, what organizations, political or otherwise, have you belonged to since 1931? He didn't say, "Are you a communist?" He said, "What have you belonged to?" I just turned to the judge and said, "I refuse to answer that question." Everyone, any lawyer would immediately say to the judge, "Irrelevant and immaterial." If that man had said that word, I would still be here today, and the project would have been built. But my lawyer said nothing, not a word. He's just pale white. He told me later, "Frank, if I had objected to that question, the people would have known that I, meaning he, was a communist, because I objected to that question. I said, what about me? He said, well, you have a problem too.
One of the top communist agents assigned to Operation Abolition is Frank Wilkinson, recently convicted for contempt of Congress for refusal to answer questions concerning his Communist Party membership and activities. Listen to this interview closely, because in it you will hear Frank Wilkinson, a communist agent, explain his communist jargon.
In the committee hearings today, you were called an international communist agent. Are you a communist?
Until they have resolved this matter and declared these kind of questions under compulsion to be illegal and unconstitutional, I refuse to answer the questions away from the committee, just as I refuse to answer them directly to the committee when I've been called.
I was fired. I'm out. Destroyed. Really destroyed. Neutralized is the way the FBI listed it. They successfully neutralized me. Crews of television people arrived at the courtroom, walked in to take pictures of the whole scene. Mayor Bowen was removed. He would have been a shoo-in in 1953. After this was reported to the press, the Times and other papers crusading against the mayor, Bowen was wiped out. And the new mayor, Norris Polson, came in and started the negotiations to turn the site, not back to the people, but to turn it over to Walter O'Malley and the Brooklyn Dodgers. We spent millions of dollars getting ready for it, and the Dodgers picked it up for just a fraction of that. It was just a tragedy for the people and for the city. It was the most hypocritical thing that could possibly happen. The city promising you a decent home.
For refusing to answer the questions of the House Un-American Activities Committee, Frank Wilkinson spent a year in jail. It was the beginning of Frank's own legal battle against the FBI, which had targeted Frank as part of a deliberate effort to destroy the nation's public housing programs.
O'Malley's team fought an uphill political battle as this new deal violated the city's previous agreement to devote Chavez Ravine for public purposes. City voters were given the opportunity to weigh in 1958, but ultimately this new deal with the Dodgers stood still. And the following January, the Supreme Court upheld the new deal. On May 1959, which came to be known as Black Friday for former residents of Chavez Ravine, sheriff deputies and bulldozers came to forcefully evict any remaining families in Chavez Ravine.
On May 8, 1959, the remaining residents were ordered to abandon their homes. One of the last holdouts, a resident named Abrana Arechiga, tried to hold off police. Her daughter, Aurora Vargas, in images that made their way to people across the country, was forcibly carried out of her home. TV news viewers watched that night as the final families were violently evicted. Afterwards, right in front of the residents, bulldozers destroyed the last of the community.
It's, to this day, an episode that will never be able to be unseen, and which really kind of sent a message about who the city was for and who the city will protect.
At the stadium's groundbreaking, newspapers photographed kids collecting dirt from the site in souvenir boxes, and O'Malley holding a souvenir shovel signed Chavez Ravine.
As though that ground had never been broken before.
Dodger Stadium opened nearly 3 years later in April 10, 1962. And this is not the only time that communities were destroyed to build something over them. For example, highways. That was a really big common occurrence that I see happen a lot. And they were built over POC thriving communities. That was today's piece of hidden history that most of us don't really know about. Alright guys, bye, and stay educated and stay vigilant. Have a good day.
Try to raise a hand or a fist to this is bad. It's just like a bandit, I'll leave you empty.